Hi guys, welcome back to the channel for another Dead Matter interview. I've been doing these with most of the development teams so far, but this one is a little bit different, and I think you guys are going to like it. So enjoy the watch, and if you like the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Enjoy. Okay, so Regi, tell me a little bit about your role within the team. What is it that you do for the world of Dead Matter?
Well, I'm the writer. I work on lore within the game, so things like backstories of NPCs, what the infection actually is, the timeline of events between the outbreak and the start of gameplay, which is 2 weeks after the outbreak.
Okay.
Events leading up to that, as well as events around the world that factor into the outbreak.
Okay,
so,
that's really cool actually, because like you mentioned that like what factors into the outbreak actually starting, so you kind of already have in your head what's led, like what events have led to causing it.
Yeah,
is what
exactly.
you're saying.
The way I usually talk about it is I basically add the why did that happen, like the answer to that. Even if the players never see the answer, it's there, and that's what I like to have.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, if we were taking this away from video games, right, it comes down to a good story. Like a good story, there has to be reasons behind everything that happens. Like whether it's crucial to the plot or not, there needs to be a background behind that. I think things like D&D as well are a perfect example of when that needs to occur. You know, because like if you're drawing a story, you're painting a world, especially if you're designing one from scratch. You know, it's important to have all that background information, so that's really cool to hear that you guys have really got that ready and you know what you're doing there. One of the really cool things that I loved seeing as well, and I'm sure if anybody's watching this, you may have seen this if you follow the Dead Matter Twitter, is that there's been like some things like what were they, like the 911 calls and things like that, and those are super cool. Like really, they're just just kind of snippets of like, you know, just the build up, I guess, but it's really cool to see those, and it shows that when it comes to what's going on in the world at the time of the outbreak, that you've really thought about that. So that's really cool to see. Okay, cool.
Another part is, I mean, I also work, like as far as points of interest go, I work really closely with the world and level design team members, just so they can like help build from the ground up any locations that have specific stories that need to be told.
Right. Okay. So potentially, we're not just talking about characters' stories. You also have quite a lot to do with like the various points of interest in buildings, key locations that might play into the lore. Key locations, even minor locations. Like I've got a bunch of just tiny, like little, almost like vignette stories that are in certain buildings and stuff like that. Okay, that's really cool. Thank you. So how did you get picked for the Dead Matter team? What initially took your interest as well with regards to the project?
I mean, initially what grabbed my interest is just the fact that it's a quote-unquote zombie game in Canada, which is not, you never hear about games in Canada hardly. And I mean I got picked for the actual like being on the team in June 2019. But I was in the community from like probably early on in the Kickstarter in 2017. Became a moderator later in 2017 after the Kickstarter ended. I mean, became community rep about a year after that. Just so I've been here a long time.
yeah, it sounds like it.
And then let's see, was it June? Yeah, June 2019 was a little after I graduated with my BA, and my BA is in creative writing. And so I'd kind of been talking to the team and kind of showing some pieces I'd been working on over the time, like I was in university and before that. And Nick asked me after I graduated and I had a little bit more free time to dedicate to the project. He asked me if I wanted to join as the writer.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds really cool. So that I didn't know that about you, and for anybody that doesn't know, is me and Regi get on quite well anyway. But I actually didn't know that. I didn't know that you had a qualification in creative writing. It could have just been that I forgot, because I forget everything. But that's really cool, and I think that puts a little bit of stock in the fact that you're going to know what you're talking about. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's what you're doing for the game. So that's really cool to learn as well.
My BA is in creative writing, and at the same time, I got a certificate in professional and technical writing, which also adds to the design aspect.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's really cool. Awesome. Okay. So how important do you think background lore is for a game like Dead Matter?
See, my knee-jerk reaction is to say it's amazing. It's like one of the deepest things you can have, but I can't toot my own horn that much. I think for an open world like Dead Matter, lore does mean a lot, especially when it comes to exploration and breathing a lived-in feel to the world. That way, it's just not it's not a playground. Like, it's just not an empty playground of empty houses and stuff like that, where player comes in the door, grabs up the scattering of loot, and then leaves. I want everybody to have like an interest when they enter a building. Right.
Yeah, so when you're looting, you walk into a building and, I don't know, there's something small, like there's signs of a struggle or something like that.
Or you find a note, or like it could even just be like you could almost tell a story just with the trash on the ground.
Yeah, just little things to take your interest. I understand completely what you're talking about, and I think when it comes to sandbox games, quote unquote sandbox games, it's something that is really missing from a lot of games in the genre.
That's why games like Red Dead Redemption 2 gets so much attention, is because that world, there's not an empty spot in that entire world, and it's one of the things I love about that game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good example, actually, because that's an example of an open world that has more life breathed into it than perhaps other ones that are available. I won't say any names, but
me either.
But there is a lot of survival, like especially zombie survival games out there that don't have this aspect of storytelling, and we're thrown into this world and we don't know how it started, we don't know why we're there, we don't know why everyone else is there, we don't know how far along we are even a lot of the time. And
I'm always asking myself why this matters when I walk into something, especially if it's a huge point of interest on the map. I want to know why.
Yeah, absolutely. So this kind of links into one of the other questions I had. I'm going to skip to a question I had planned a little bit later here, which is tell me a bit more about how players are going to be able to find out more about the world around them when they're actually in game. So you've just mentioned that you like to keep houses and things like that interesting. So tell us a bit more about how that's going to work.
So I've probably been picked up like hinting at it. Exploration is a huge thing for me. I want to, if you see something, to go check it out, investigate it. And like, it could be one of those things where you get a task for a faction and you have to go to this one location, grab something and bring it back, even if it's just like a simple fetch quest like that. You go out there, but say like on your way there or on the way back, you see a building that looks weird, or like the door has been caved in or something like that. You can kind of divert a little bit and go check it out. You're not in a linear mission. You can go and explore on the way there, or if you need to, run in and find something in order to stay alive or hide, and you might find a note or an audio log or something like that. Just clues that give you directions to more clues to just build up the story of what happened. Yeah. No, that sounds really, really interesting. And I think one game that I'd kind of like to mention, which perhaps didn't do as well as perhaps it could have, but did quite well, I think, in the storytelling aspect and little kind of I guess snippets of the world, was Conan Exiles. And I don't played that. Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if you've played that, but where you play a survivor, and you're basically just making a way for yourself in this world, and there's lots of different points of interest for you to discover, and even in like not even at all of these points of interest, just throughout the world, there are little notes, and those get read to you. There's usually a voice actor to go with it, and I think that's like such a small thing,
but it's really interesting because you get like a look at this person's outlook on the world that you're playing in and what happened to them, you know.
That's actually really cool.
So something like that I'm very excited about, because of my kind of background with games like that, and it interests you. It makes you want to dive further into that point of interest, or like points of interest, you know, related to their story almost. Some of them being,
want to,
you know,
give players a reason to venture into like dangerous areas that they normally wouldn't for other than loot. I mean, they're probably still going to get decent loot when they go to these dangerous areas, just because that's, you know, risk and reward. But I want to give them another reason. I want them to like go in there so they can find something out.
Yeah, that's really good to hear, because I think again this is something that a lot of survival games are missing. So we're just talking about another game that Conan Exiles that I was kind of drawing from. But are you drawing any inspiration from games, stories, or movies, even books, that we might be able to relate to in terms of quest design and background lore?
Yeah. You mentioned D&D earlier. I
Yes.
play D&D very regularly. I've done a couple homebrew campaigns, like just my own little stories and stuff like that. I love the just openness of quests in D&D, so I pull a lot of inspiration from that. And you'll even catch me in Discord or just talking about it. I'll refer to quests in Dead Matter that they're not quests. It's not a fantasy game, so I'm not gonna call them that in the game. But as far as other stories, of course you've got Stalker, Metro, any of the games, any of the Metro or Stalker games. Red Dead Redemption 2 I mentioned. Movies, I really like 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later. They've got that kind of, there's the story, and then there's the background story that happens in those.
So I've actually never seen those films.
Oh,
That's that's an embarrassing admission from me. I've never seen those films.
You've got homework, Doc.
Yeah, maybe that's something for me to go away and do after this, perhaps.
Some other movies, maybe. I Am Legend is a big one. That's another one that's got like a really kind of like subtle backstory that you can read in the background.
Yes.
The Road, which is an amazing book as well as movie. Depressing as hell. But that's another inspiration. It's kind of like there's a lot going on in the foreground. There's a lot. All this stuff that happens in the background is what I love.
Yeah.
And as far as like more, I guess, horror movie related goes, have you seen, I don't know if you've seen Hereditary, but that's one of those movies that there's so much that happens in the background that if you don't pay attention to it, you'll be lost almost. Yeah.
So I haven't seen that film myself, but I'm a bit of a wuss when it comes to horror movies. I will admit. You're making me admit a lot of things I'm embarrassed about in this already. But I definitely am not a big fan of horror movies, which is interesting. And I'm so interested in zombies and, you know, that kind of genre. But
I've got a shout out to Romero as well. I mean, I know Dead Matters, Infected aren't like anything like Romero's zombies, but he has a really strong storytelling. Especially Dawn of the Dead was my favorite one. I love the original. I've got a special place in my heart for the 2004 remake, though.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yep. Okay,
and there's
cool.
Puns. Like, can you not see the puns in the background of Dawn of the Dead 2004?
Yes, I'm sure anybody that knows Regi, from my community, perhaps the Dead Matter community as well, Regi loves his puns. And I'm really, Regi, this is completely off topic and not something I had in the questions I wanted to ask you, but I'm really, really hoping that you decide to put a couple of puns in the game, please. Because
I would... You know me. You know there's going to be puns.
I would love to see that.
Smack your forehead when you read a task title or something like that, but it'll be...
Oh, man, that's the best thing. And I think one of the... It's kind of unrelated to the story in the background, but World of Warcraft, its quest design leaves something to be desired sometimes, but the titles for the quests, man, like some of them are just brilliant. Like there's so many puns and kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like references to
Yeah.
popular culture, and it's great. Always gives you a little chuckle here and
Also
there.
like the quest titles from like the Fallout games and things like that.
Yes, yeah, that's another really good example. Yep. Okay, cool. Thank you for that. So, for those that have read the recent blog update or have listened to my audio summary of said blog update, they'll already know you're quite invested in making sure characters we interact with have their own backstories. So tell us about how we can interact with these characters and what has driven you to put such an emphasis on building out their backstories.
So the biggest thing is I'm not a fan of empty characters, either in movies or books or video games. It's just I think all characters should, especially the ones that players interact with, should be well-rounded. They should have a reason for being there. They should have like a believable backstory. Like, I just don't want them to be essentially what they are when you boil it down. Is they're a game mechanic. They're something you go to get things to do. I want them to be more than that. I don't want them just to be a post that you come talk to.
Yep, I can understand that, because then at the end of the day, if that were the case, you might just want to go down something much like Fallout 76 did, for example, which we won't talk about whether we like or dislike at this time, but there wasn't many there wasn't many kind of interactable characters in that game. And most of the quests you got were in the form of notes and things like that.
Which I'm okay with that. That was one of the things I kind of did enjoy about that. It's like kind of exploring buildings. Yeah. But I do, like, if you talk to an NPC, I want you to, like, you'll have the different options to like trade or get a task or something like that. I almost called it a quest. But if you talk to them, you'll have extra dialogue options, and if you might find that they went through something or saw something out in the world, and you either kind of want to immediately go check it out, or you might be in the area unknowingly and like recognize their name on the mailbox of the house you just went into, and just have that little moment. And I like things that click in the background like that, even if they don't necessarily have to.
Yes, I think one of like and I know we're drawing a lot of relations from other games here, but I think one of the games that I thought did that really well was The Division. The first Division game. Their world design was stellar. Like, there were aspects of the game that, in my opinion, needed tweaking and were never quite got right, in my opinion. Yeah. But when it comes to the world design and the story that went with it, was amazing. Like, the points of interest were incredible. The little stories that went on, and the echo holograms that you had that you could investigate were amazing. The way they did that was just so intuitive and so easy to follow, and yet had like a lot of smaller bits to it. So like there were a lot of like things that you could pick up from those and be like, oh, that's related to this that we found earlier. And it's like stuff like that, and connecting the dots to me is really important for a good story, you know.
There's another game, a newer one too, Jedi: The Fallen Order. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. There are little things you can go out of the way. There's secrets, and you don't have to find them. You can play the whole game without ever knowing they were there. But depending on how you find them, you can put together a little side story of something that happened in that area. And I like wholly appreciate it when a game does that, and that's something I'd love to do.
Yeah, I think there has to be a line drawn between kind of voluntarily looking for this information and the character or being forced into digesting it. I'm
not a fan of spoon feeding at all. And in fact, I find it kind of annoying.
Yeah, so exactly.
If players want to learn, they're gonna probably need to go out of their way to learn it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a good thing, because like for if we're talking about longevity of a game and like how much playtime you can put into it, especially for the likes of myself and other streamers as well that are going to be exploring this game with their communities, things like that are really cool, because I feel like, you know, we're going to have people coming into our chats, or you're going to have your friends talking to you and being like, hey dude, have you been to this location yet?
Yes.
And you'll be like, yeah, I've been there, and they were like, oh, did you find this note? And you might say no, and then they're like, dude, you've got to go back and read that. It tells you this really cool story, and this this happened, and then I went over here and found this, and stuff like that is really, really cool for me. And I love the feeling of connecting the dots of a story whilst playing the games that I'm playing. So I really appreciate the kind of the small, like you said, the vignettes and stuff like that are going on in the background, and I love that. I think that's really going to be cool. So moving on from the characters and their backstories, I want to focus on one particular character, which, for the people that have watched the vlogs and read the blog summaries and all of that, will probably have heard of him before. Duke Cartilage. He's going to be a very prominent figure in Dead Matter. Can you tell me a bit more about him?
He is. Whenever a player turns, like if they get a radio going, whenever your player turns on the radio, that's primarily who they're gonna hear. He has his own take on events in the world. But he also tries to keep survivors informed. So like, there's things going on in the world. I won't say what he's gonna talk about necessarily, but he also does things like say like inclement weather is coming in. Like if there's a whiteout about to hit during the winter, you'll get a little bit of a heads up if you've got your radio on and you're listening to him.
Gotcha. So it's like a pirate quest. It's like a pirate radio thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's definitely pirate radio.
Which is really, really interesting to know that that's going to play a part. And kind of drawing from The Division again was another game that had a pirate radio host, and it kind of helped. Even
Hopefully
if
it won't be as repetitive as him.
Yes, that was a little bit repetitive, but yes, I feel like that's like a really cool thing because it gives you like these other opinions, and that can help shape your opinion on what happened as well,
or give
and tell you a little bit more. Yeah, absolutely. So I really like the idea of having this like radio host, and I think that's again something very different than other survival games. Like I don't think I've seen that in many other kind of like survival situations.
I know Stalker has a radio that they have as well. It only ever pops up in Stalker as like a text thing, but it's there.
Yeah, I've seen that in the past. Definitely a cool feature, and I think that it could be something to kind of look forward to for sure. Is the voice actor for Duke someone that we might be familiar with, or is there any teasers you can give us on that front?
Unfortunately, don't have any teasers ready right now.
Okay.
If he's actually briefly in the May 2018 trailer that we put out, and you can link that, I guess, somewhere.
Okay.
But he's in there. You can very briefly hear him, kind of get an idea of what he sounds like and what he's going to talk about. But if you've been in our community Discord for a while, he's not in there all the time, but he's one of our contributors. His name is not Alex, and if you hear his voice, you'll know exactly why he's named that. But in upcoming vlogs and blogs, hopefully I will have some more clips that we can play for you.
Okay, cool. So what I'll do is I will go to the March, you said March 2018?
May 2018.
May 2018 video, and I will link that with a timestamp in the description of this video for you guys to give that a listen. And not Alex, I apologize in advance for any messages you might get as a result of this video. But I'm sure that he might be happy to talk about it if you guys want to shoot him a message and find out a little bit more. But that's really cool. That's interesting. Really cool to kind of put a name to the character that we might be finding in game. So that's awesome. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Now, tasks or quests, whatever we want to call them, are something that is going to make Dead Matter stand out from a lot of similar survival games. That much is fair to say. Are we going to have a quote-unquote main set of tasks to follow and side quests too? Or is this going to work in a different way altogether?
So the tasks aren't there. There's no main quest. The main quest is basically you surviving. That's your main goal in the game, is just not dying, which is probably not going to be the easiest thing. But there are different factions will have tasks for you to do. The different traders and the trader NPCs will have different tasks for the player to complete, and they will have their own stories. Now, whether or not you want those to be your main story, that is totally up to the player. So if you've got a faction you really like, there you go. You just stick with them, do all their missions. You might piss off another faction, but you'll be fine. Yeah, that's your main story though. Like if you want it to be. So
okay,
it's kind of like going back to D&D. You can go 100 different directions if you want, but there's really not a main plot unless you want there to be.
Now this is something that I kind of wanted to talk about with you in a little bit more detail, because I love the fact that it's gonna, like, at least it's looking like it's going to be so diverse. Like there's gonna be so many options for us to follow, and every single choice we make could impact us in some way that we might not see at first. Like your mention of factions, for example. If we do a certain amount of quests for one faction, like you've said, we might piss off another faction that is not allied with them in the slightest. And I really like that, because it gives us choices, and it gives us, again, replayability. It gives us the chance to go back and do it a different way the next time around, which I really like. And I think again, that's similar to, I must admit I haven't played them in that much detail myself. I have played them, but not too deeply. That's something similar to the Stalker games, right? Is that there's different factions in that game, and you can do things for every single faction, but they're not friends with each other all the time.
No, they're not. And you can definitely piss off an opposing faction just by working against. It's not necessarily like just because you're working with this group, you are gonna just piss off the other people. It's not like oh, you're friends with him. No, I don't like you anymore. It's sometimes that faction's quests that you're working with will actively work against the interests of another faction. So that's why they're gonna get mad. Okay,
so it's less a reputation system and more, you're doing this is going to make these guys unhappy if you do it.
Right. So you can balance out your there is a reputation system. It's just
okay.
Different. You can balance it out between them, so you kind of keep everybody kind of happy, but you'll lose out. There's how do I put it? There are benefits to going all in with one faction or another that you won't get if you try to make everybody happy. Okay,
interesting. I won't probe too heavily on that, but that sounds really, really enticing. I can't wait to do that. I'm one of those people that likes to follow a storyline to its end. So for me, I will probably go kind of like faction by faction, if you like. Like I will pick one, I will finish all of their stuff, and then go to the next. Whether or not that'll change when I actually get in game, we'll see, but that's how I like to do things, and I like to kind of like follow a storyline. Like I'm terrible in games like Skyrim, Fallout, that sort of thing, because once I start a story that's interesting to me, I want to finish it. And sometimes that means I go through like 5 different quests in a row, but it's all for the same storyline, and then I look back and I've out-leveled all my other ones that I could potentially be interested in later. That is absolutely one of the things I'm guilty of. But in Dead Matter, I think that's going to be really cool because of the way that the timeline works. So we'll get the chance to go back and do it all over again, which is kind of cool.
So it'll also give players some kind of incentive, like if they're playing by themselves or if they're playing with a group or if like it's a community server. If that timeline reaches an end, which there's not an end per se, it's just kind of the story kind of has to stop at some point. And so like once you reach a conclusion or something like that, you can either, if you're playing by yourself, you can reset it and just try like start a different path, or you can just keep surviving, or there's a lot that'll happen. And of course there are constraints with design, like it takes a lot to write a timeline that would potentially go infinitely without being garbage.
Sure. Yeah, I can absolutely understand that, and I think for a lot of people that lore and background is really, really going to be important to them, more so than just is a mission, go do it. It needs to be meaningful. It needs to have a purpose. There needs to be like an outcome. It needs to affect the world around you to make it an actual living, breathing experience. So I like that there's some thought going into that. Factions, like we just talked about, seem to be quite an important part of Dead Matter, especially with things changing over time. And we've talked about already how certain factions, like we choose to follow through with one thing, it could potentially burn certain bridges with others. But I assume it's gonna make different options in terms of tasks and dialogue potentially as well. Like if we do one thing, is it gonna have a knock-on effect and give us more options with somebody else, for example?
So like the more tasks you do for a faction, the higher your reputation will be with them, and so you'll eventually reach like a kind of a trusted status within the faction, and you'll get more dialogue options. You'll get more quests that have more impact and meaning. Like they're not gonna give random dude who just walked into their settlement, they're not going to give them the most important thing to the settlement to go do.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. That's really cool. So we can see kind of like I guess again, a meaningful progression to the way that we interact with the factions in the game. So that's really interesting to see. That's
definitely one of the progression avenues within the game. I mean, there's like gear progression, obviously.
Yeah.
Timeline progression, and of course there's faction progression, which you can mess with by working with one faction or another.
Yeah, I really do like the idea of that. I think for me, I'm a big story fan. I'm guilty as charged. I love story games. I love following like little interesting snippets of lore. I'm a huge nerd when it comes into like when I find a universe that I'm interested in. I want to know everything there is to know about it. I want to understand everything that's going on. So having that all there and giving us the chance to do that is something that a lot of survival games haven't given us, and I really think that's going to set it apart, which is really cool to see.
I was just about to mention, it's like one of the things that kind of drew me in was the fact that there's going to be this kind of system in Dead Matter, and the fact that all this stuff that we're talking about is nestled into a survival game and not just its own thing is something that is incredibly intriguing to me. Even like, and I'm working on it, and I'm still like, yeah, this is gonna be so cool.
Well, I mean, that's a really good thing, and to be fair, it's been a while since I've done like another interview, but all of the interviews that I have done in the past, everyone is genuinely interested in the game, which yes should be the case. But it isn't always the case when it's essentially, it is, at the end of the day, it's a job, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't require you to be interested in it. But if you are, it can make for much better results, right? And I think that's a really important thing about the way that the Dead Matter is being developed. Everybody that's on board, it just seems like everybody is really, really interested in how it's going to turn out, and they're excited, which means that their work, especially yours, with it being so heavily tied to, you know, your imagination at the end of the day, is important, right? Like it's so important. So yeah, that's really, really interesting to touch on. Regi, I have one last question for you, and it's not particularly related to dialogue, but what kind of survivor are you going to be, Regi?
That's a tough question. Kind of depends on the server I'm gonna be on.
Oh, okay.
Because I know, like in the closed alpha, even though much of it is spoiled to me, I'm still gonna want to see it in game.
Yeah.
So like in the closed alpha or beyond that, I'm probably gonna spend a fair bit of time just exploring. I'll live that nomadic life and live out the back of a truck if I have to. Okay. But I want to go see stuff. But I also have a relatively tight-knit group that I'm not going to plug because I don't feel like getting plagued with applications. That we're going to try and run kind of a trading ring, like a friendly. Like we'll do what we got to do to survive, but like trading. And so, like if you notice on the Kickstarter page and on Indiegogo, there's a mention that trains are in there, and while trains are on the design back burner right now, so we can get all the central core stuff out of the way first.
Sure.
I definitely want to run a like train trade route.
That is perhaps the most interesting response I've had to that question so far, because that is something really unique, and I think that's going to be really, really cool. And I definitely think it depends on what server you play on. That's a fair comment, because that might not work if it's a heavy PvP server, for example. But that's a really cool outlook on making the game different. And I really think that to get the best out of this game, we are going to have to look at things like that. Yeah, the story is important, the dialogue is important, tasks are important, the background lore is important, but at the end of the day, every single survivor has a role to play, and if you think outside the box and want to do something different, you can give everyone else around you a more enjoyable experience by doing so.
Exactly. I'm not big on even playing other survival games. I'm not big on just killing on sight. I like that interaction. I like the risk. Yeah. It just gets, to me, and it's a personal opinion, I feel like just kind of dropping dead in the middle of a field because somebody shot you for the hell of it, it's boring. I don't like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
no, I understand it. I understand it.
Play to not let that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I come from Escape from Tarkov, which is pretty much exactly what you were describing, with getting shot dead in the middle of a field by just about anyone. But I feel like in a game... Yeah, exactly. I feel like in a game like Dead Matter, I'll want to play that a little bit different. And I don't know if I've mentioned this in any of my other interviews in the past, but we are looking at setting up our own server once we get the ability to do so. And dude, I am going to be so excited to put some basic groundwork in place in terms of I don't know whether I'm going to have kill on site or not, or what goes on there, but I would like to think that there's going to be a bit more to it because of the community that we have.
I know it's going to happen just because it's a survival game, but
yeah,
I'd like to see it not necessarily happen all the time. I don't want that to be people's default response to seeing another player.
Yeah, I think it depends on the server you're on, depends on the community you have. Also depends on some game mechanics, like how easy it is to come across weaponry.
Or skills, for that matter.
Yeah.
You might be your profession in the game might be maybe pick doctor or something like that. But as a doctor, you might not have the best ability to fix your car up. That player you just shot very well could have been a mechanic that could have helped you with that.
Yeah, and I think the storytelling aspect comes into play there, because you're setting I guess a precedent for the players that there's more to this world than just shoot, loot, repeat.
Yeah,
right?
You could see another player and be like, dude, come check this out.
yeah, I think when I did my video about base building, for example, and stuff like that, or quote unquote base building, because we know it's not going to work that way. Yeah, reinforcement, if you like, is going to offer its own kind of system there as well, because if somebody chooses to fortify a gas station and they have control of gas at that particular location, you might not want to go blowing down the door when your vehicle is out of gas and you're out in the wilderness, Yep. Things like that. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting take, something we haven't heard just yet. Regi, that is all the questions that I had for you. We absolutely, having had this conversation, we absolutely need to play D&D sometime.
Definitely.
Got to set something up there. Really appreciate you talking to me, man. Thank you very much. Is there any closing thoughts you want to give everybody before we wrap up?
Not beyond plugging the usual stuff. If you want to come chat with everybody, jump in the community Discord, hit us up on Twitter. We've got a Facebook page, an Instagram page now, which is new.
Yes.
Posted that in the last blog post. So come talk to us. We're always in the community. You can hardly ever go a day without seeing one of the devs or me or Hank or one of the moderators or something like that.
Yeah.
So we're there.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Regi. And I will speak to you no doubt in the future.
All right, man. I will talk to you later.
All right. See you later.